Okay. I am Georgia Gibson-Henlin, partner Henlin Gibson-Henlin attorneys at law with an interest in digital intellectual property and legal issues in cyberspace. I am your moderator for this session. The objective of this session and this discussion is to explore opportunities and developments which emerging mechanisms and internet advancement have unearthed for IP protection, transfer and sharing. Equally important are the deterrents and dangers of infringement which have emerged due to this ease of access and unauthorized transfer of digital content. We have an expert panel here to discuss these issues with you. I'm going to introduce all the panel members and write up as a start, and then ask you to hold all the questions until the end of their presentation. First up, we'll have Mr. David Greenspan, Senior Director, Legal and Business Affairs at NAMCO BANDAI Games America, Inc., San Francisco, USA. He has been involved in the video game industry for over 15 years, serving as Director, Legal and Business Affairs for some of the most significant video game publishers at the time in the industry, including Sony 989 Studios, a division of Sony Computer Entertainment America, Inc., and THQ, Inc. He currently works as a Senior Director of Legal and Business Affairs for NAMCO BANDAI America and is an adjunct professor at Santa Clara University School of Law, where he teaches a class in entertainment transactions. He has worked on the day-to-day business and legal issues of more than one video and games, and has been involved in all aspects of video game development, publishing, licensing, distribution, and marketing, and has negotiated hundreds of agreements covering these areas. He is the author of the recent WIPO publication entitled Mastering the Game, Business and Legal Issues for Video Game Developers. Next up, we'll have Ms. Marcel Smart, Country Manager, Microsoft Jamaica. Marcel Smart is a graduate of University of the West Indies, Mona, where she earned her degrees with honors, a Bachelor of Science in Electronics and a Master of Science in Computer-Based Management Information Systems with honors. She has also served there as an adjunct lecturer of a postgraduate course in human factors in the user interface design. She served as a director for the Junior Achievement Jamaica Limited, is a member of the Rotary Club of St. Andrew North, and is a member of the Toastmasters Pace Setters Club. The first phase of her career is based on 10 years' experience in systems administration and business systems analyst in Jamaica, culminating in her role as Assistant Vice President for the manufacturer's Sigma Merchant Bank, now Pan-Caribbean Financial Services. Miss Grace Lindo will be your next speaker. She's an associate at Nunes, Scholefield, DeLeon & Co., attorneys at law. She heads the intellectual property team, where she oversees the registration of trademarks and applications for patents, advises on anti-counterfeiting matters and miscellaneous intellectual property and cyber law matters. She also has a corporate and/or commercial law practice and has a special interest in technology companies. Grace is currently a member of the International Trademarks Association, where she serves as a member of that body's Internet Committee, specifically domain name disputes and who is subcommittee. She is also a member of the Jamaican Bar Association's Intellectual Property Committee and Commercial Law Committee. We also have Ms. Kenia Mattis, CEO, co-founder, ListenMi Caribbean Limited, an avid music and nature lover from the small tourist town of Ocherius. Kenia brings a unique combination of interests and experiences to her role as CEO of ListenMi Caribbean Limited. ListenMi Caribbean is a creative digital media production company whose goal is to build innovative digital media products that inspire creativity, enrich Caribbean community, and integrate globally. They have already begun with ListenMi News, which has which was voted one of the top 9 stories that show the rising power of social media in Jamaica. Last year, the company was also selected by the World Bank InfoDev program as one of the top 50 global entrepreneurs at the 2013 Global Forum on Innovation and Technology Entrepreneurship in South Africa. As I turn over to our panelists, and as I was preparing for this presentation, one of the things that I came across was December 18, 2013 headline in one of my technology magazines. It says, "In Beyonce we trust, and then on iTunes we buy. End nears for physical media." Summary: Beyonce has scored a major coup with her newest album, which was released exclusively on iTunes and sold nearly 830,000 copies in 3 days. It is also a sign of the times and an apt epitaph for the physical media. On that note, I'm going to turn over to our exciting panelists and ask you to join me in welcoming them.
Can I lower this? Hope I don't disappoint. I'm supposed to be exciting. So before I even start, I just want to thank everyone and welcoming me to this beautiful country. I've met some amazing people. They've been incredibly kind, courteous, and incredibly smart as well. So thanks very much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to speak in front of you. Our panel this morning is going to talk about digital distribution. I have a video game background, and so I thought what I would do is break down my discussion primarily what and how the industry works. So in order to discuss digital distribution, you need to build certain blocks to understand. So I'm going to build those blocks, A, B, C, and then eventually we'll get to D, which will be talk about digital distribution. I don't have a lot on the mobile industry because in the United States we usually separate digital distribution from the mobile industry, but I will throw in some facts about the mobile industry. There are a lot of similarities between those two industries, primarily easy access to the markets for developers, which is very critical. They also have some problems with piracy. The video game industry was briefly mentioned yesterday and probably deserves a lot more attention since it is the fastest growing sector in the entertainment industry. And I thought I'd break my discussion down into 3 levels. I use the word levels because it's similar to playing a game. You have 3 levels perhaps that you got to beat. Level 1 will deal with an introduction to the video game industry and some numbers showcasing the growth of the industry. I think a lot of people are going to be surprised about some of these numbers. Level 2 will be a quick overview of the game development and distribution process, highlighting the major players. And Level 3 will focus on digital distribution, which has become a major form of distribution now for video games throughout the world. And if we survive and make it through Level 3, hopefully Level 4 you'll be able to ask some questions. So a lot of people, and when I say a lot of people, I usually think of my dad. They think of video game players as someone who's 17, male, sitting downstairs in the basement, hooked up to the television set, playing a game, shooting a lot of bad guys. And that may have been true once, but times have changed. So today, the average player is in their 30s, likely to be female, and primarily playing, that's not a bad thing, primarily from the East and not the West. Now, the reason why I say primarily female, because that's skewed a little differently. The real hardcore gamers, admittedly, majority are going to be male players. But with tablets and mobile phones, easy access to use games, more women are playing. And at one time, PlayStation, when they first came out in the United States, their advertisement was PlayStation, the world's best babysitter. So according to the 2013 facts that were put out by the computer and video game industry in the United States called the Entertainment Software Association, 51% of American households own a dedicated game console machine, which is a Sony PlayStation, a Microsoft Xbox perhaps, or a Nintendo Wii. The average age of the video game player is 30. 45% of all players are women. And the average number of years gamers have been playing video games is 13 years. So that's why this industry continues to grow, because the thinking was when someone who was 17 at one time becomes 30 and has to take care of kids and do a lot of other stuff, they stop playing games. But in fact, that hasn't happened. As the technology has gotten better, the video game industry has grabbed these kids at a very young age, and they continue to play. So people in their 30s and their 40s, even their 50s, are playing video games. Actually, even in their 70s, because when Nintendo introduced their system a few years ago, the Wii, it appealed to an older crowd as well as a very young crowd because it was very easy to play. Grandparents like playing with their grandchildren. And so that platform became very successful. Today, gamers of all ages play on a variety of different platforms and can be connected with players from around the world, whether on a mobile device, tablet, PC, or console, such as a PlayStation 4 or Xbox One. And not only have the demographics of players changed dramatically in the last 20 years, but so have the games themselves. Development and marketing budgets for many games are in tens of millions of dollars or higher, with games providing realistic graphics, voiceover, faithful depictions of character movements, which I'll show tomorrow, that produced by the use of motion capture. So what happens with that is that athletes or characters that are portrayed in a game are provided with sensors throughout their body, and their movements are captured by software. Also, music equal to film scores now appear in video games. In fact, many famous film composers are now composing music for games. And also, and perhaps more importantly, original storylines, new ideas coming from a different sector of the entertainment industry. Many believe that the video game industry has actually surpassed the other industries in revenue. At the very least, and it all depends on what stats you're using, $65 billion industry. The video game industry is a $65 billion industry, and it clearly rivals the film industry and has also surpassed the music industry. Today, the video game industry employs tens of thousands of people, contributing billions of dollars to government tax bases around the world. And the industry is truly globalized, with major recent successes from game development studios in countries diverse as, is that the first screen or that, well, I don't know if that's the first chart, but maybe it is. Okay, the new chart didn't make it, but I'll give you an example of some of the countries that have very successful development studios, and games that they've produced have made hundreds of millions of dollars. Obviously, the United States, some of the big companies you may have heard of, Electronic Arts, Activision, and even Microsoft. And Japan, NAMCO, BANDAI, Sony, Capcom, Konami, major Japanese companies. Finland, well, Rovio, they produced Angry Birds. China, you may have heard of a company called Tencent or Perfect World, and then I even was able to find wargaming.net, and that's from Belarus, if I pronounced it correctly. The growth of the video game industry has been done in a relatively short period of time. Unlike the film industry, which probably has a history of about 100 years, a lot of movement has occurred in the video game industry in just the last 20 or so years. Perhaps the first well-known consumer-recognized game was Pong, dating back to 1972. And there was little talk about likeness. And if anyone remember Pong from 1972, it was basically a straight line, and that represented the different characters. I like to say that they used my likeness for that, but I wasn't able to claim any money. And it made its debut in 1972 in a self-contained arcade machine. It was made by Atari, which became a very big player in the video game industry. Right now, they're kind of out of the picture. And they were financed with, or capitalized with, about $500. So they put the machine in a bar in Northern California, and the owner gets a call from the bar and says, "Your machine's broken." Well, they panicked and said, "Oh my gosh, we just came out with this new product, it's not working." They immediately go over to the store. What do they find out? The reason why the machine was broken was because there were too many quarters stuffed into the slot. So that opened up the floodgates. So when Pong made its debut, as I talked about, it was obviously very unique. 13 years later, Nintendo introduced the first mainstream commercial console in 1985 and subsequently sold more than 60 million units. Fast forward, 1995, Sony introduces the PlayStation, which basically revolutionized the industry with vastly improved characters and capabilities on the technology side. And once I get these papers fixed, subsequent major events since the release of the PlayStation have included Microsoft getting into the gaming world, the growth of online, mobile, and social gaming, new forms of distribution such as digital, which we'll talk about later, and then even sensor-based gaming controls such as the Microsoft Kinect, where you wave a control and the game reacts accordingly. So let's now fast forward to 2013. Here are some very impressive numbers that came out recently. It was mentioned yesterday, the game Grand Theft Auto 5, released in September of 2013, earned more than $800 million in its first 24 hours, selling more than 11 million copies worldwide. Within 3 days, sales had hit $1 billion to become the fastest entertainment property to hit the billion mark. In comparison, the summer's biggest movie hit, Iron Man 3, brought in a worldwide sales of $372 million in its first weekend. 2, in November of 2013, both Microsoft, Xbox, well, I should say, in 2013, Microsoft introduced the Xbox One, Sony introduced the PlayStation 4, which were the next generation of console machines. They both achieved worldwide sales of over 1 million units in the first 24 hours, and each hit the 2 million mark within 18 days. 3, although estimates for the size of the mobile gaming industry vary greatly, mobile gaming generated around $8 to $12 billion in revenue in 2012. I also have some additional numbers. Numbers vary on revenue generated from mobile gaming, but according to App Annie Index, the games category as of Q2 2013 dominated the share of revenue for the iOS and Google Play app stores, which is basically where most people buy their games on mobile phones. Games in Google Play and iOS app stores accounted for over 80% and 75% of revenue, respectively. Those are pretty impressive numbers. Wait, there's more. There are currently more than 160,000 active game apps in the U.S. App Store. That's both good and bad. And finally, online revenue, which I would include as digital distribution, increased in revenue sales to $24 billion in 2012. So the video game industry is quite unique. It's different than other forms of entertainment. Its origins are partly from the entertainment world and partly from the technology world. And games, unlike films or television programs, are fundamentally made of computer code and are operated on sophisticated computers such as PC, consoles, and even today's mobile phones. And this is a unique difference that makes the video game industry a mixture of both the entertainment and technology worlds. And that's an issue for IP because you're dealing with the software as one form of IP, and then you're dealing with the visuals from the game as another form of IP. And this is also an industry at the forefront of technological advances, creativity, and connecting people throughout the world. It's constantly evolving. So if I was to do this speech, if I had done this speech last year, it would probably be very different than what I'm talking about today. How do things change? Well, the look of the characters is always changing because of better software and hardware. The hardware that delivers the games is constantly changing, allowing game developers to do more. And the forms of distribution are also changing for the consumer, where the consumer can now have instant access to games. So now I'm on level 2, getting a game into the consumer's hand. How is that done? Who are the main players? It's very simple, actually, in getting a game. All you really have to do is click a button, perhaps on your phone, or maybe move your mouse, and instantly you have a game downloaded. So first we need to look at the major players. And the primary parties involved in the video game industry range in size from multi-billion-dollar companies, including the platform manufacturers such as Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, and I'll even extend that to Nokia, although they're not doing very well, Apple, obviously, Google. Those are the companies that are involved in the development platforms where what the consumer needs in order to play games. Game publishers also typically involved in the financing, distribution, and development games. They are also on one side of the scale where they are the big players, have a lot of revenue, at least most of them. And thirdly, companies involved in providing the platform to allow companies to digitally distribute games. And the biggest company is Valve, which is a multi-billion-dollar company. On the other side of the spectrum, there are developers, which can range in size from a few kids, perhaps, in a garage making an app for the iOS platform, or to a team of hundreds of people developing a console game that can cost perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, there are very few. There are very few games that cost that much, but $30 million, $40 million, $50 million, that's not unusual for a game to cost that much if it's going to be developed for a console system. Many of the parties work together from the early stages of game development to distribution, and those three major parties are going to be the game publishers, the console manufacturers or the platform manufacturers, and finally the game developers, where the idea for a game originates. And for many companies, the rewards have been great, but there are also significant risk and uncertainties in an industry with increased costs that is trying to meet the changing habits and demands of the consumer. What games they want to play, how they play them, and how they purchase them. And on top of that, consumers can vary greatly from country to country. What appeals in one country, such as Japan, may have zero interest in the United States, because maybe the game's based on Japanese anime, and the American public doesn't necessarily like those types of games. Hockey games made in the United States, probably not that popular in Jamaica, but I'm only guessing. Soccer games, on the other hand, or well, we call them soccer, you call them football, those are obviously very successful throughout the world. And then when games are introduced into major markets, they're customized or localized for that market, assuming that the financials work in order to change that game to make it localized. And basically what localized involves is using the dialogue of that native country. So all the English comes out, it's perhaps replaced with Japanese, Brazilian Portuguese, French, Italian. As markets grow, this will become more important for video game developers to deal with. In addition to that, there could be social issues, and therefore gamers may want to change the game accordingly. And finally, countries have regulations regarding video games, content regulation similar to movies, and therefore certain things that are accepted in one country aren't necessarily accepted in another country. United States, they accept a lot more violence in video games as compared to probably the rest of Europe and Japan. Also, certain game systems, such as the Xbox One, the Sony PlayStation 4, are popular in one country, not necessarily popular in another country. And I had a chart. Can you scroll down, because I think you may have put on the wrong one. Yeah, you did. So go to, hold on one second. It's going to be WIPO presentation charts 2. It's pretty good memory, if I'm right. Can't remember what I had for dinner last night. And that chart will give you a breakdown on the different sales of the various console platforms throughout the world. In the United States, to date, the Wii console device has sold more than the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, whereas in Europe, there's difference in order. Let's see, okay, go down a little further. Oh, it may be hard to read. Up, go back, go up, go up, go up. Just two different charts probably saying the same thing. Okay. That chart's good, stay there. And then you can see in Japan, the Xbox 360 doesn't sell. Reason why, at least people have told me, that Japan never accepted Microsoft as a video game company. They always looked at them as a software company. Plus, Wii and Sony were developed by Japanese companies, so there's a dominating market for those two parties, but Microsoft not doing so well, although it does very well in other countries and is a great machine. So, who are the main characters? First, the developer. The developer would be responsible for creating the game, which is a combination of the software and the visual elements seen on the screen. Games are built on a game engine, a software program that ties graphics, sound, and gameplay elements together. It is the most critical thing for a game developer to maintain ownership of the underlying engine that they have created. Because when they finish with one game, most likely they'll be able to use that code for other games. And that's significant when it comes to saving a lot of money. I guess it's similar to the bakery. If you go to the bakery and you want a cake of a person, they carve it out, they probably use the same mold to create another character. So very, very important. It's going to be the most intense negotiations involved if a developer is getting finance from another company to maintain ownership of that underlying property. And the developer will also create visuals for the game, and this can be original IP that they've created or based on licensed property, such as I want to make a game called Spider-Man, so I need to license the rights for that. And usually it's the developer's vision that is the basis for a game, although that vision may be limited at times if there's an underlying property or if the game is being financed by a publisher. And for developers, the cost for developing can range considerably depending on the platform, because a console game will tend to be a lot more money to develop for as compared to a mobile game, which actually may only cost a few $1,000s, although I don't know how good it would be. The artwork, the gameplay complexity, and if a game involves licensing and underlying intellectual property. So games can range from $20,000, $10,000 on a mobile platform to perhaps $100 million on the PlayStation 4. And a developer typically develops a game under a number of different scenarios. One, they self-finance a game, and that's becoming pretty popular in the United States. And that's because games, perhaps, depending on the platform, maybe only cost about a few $100,000, so it may be easy to raise that money. They can raise that money, either they're a company that's been successful and therefore they have money to use for other games. And then there's something that's very popular in the United States called crowdfunding, such as Kickstarter. I don't know if anyone's heard about that, but you basically go online and you try to raise money by promoting a potential product that you're going to create. And for some video game companies, they've been able to generate a few $100,000 to make a game. Now, the nice thing about self-financing a game is that the developer is going to maintain ownership of the intellectual property. And that's very important. Now, the other way in which games are developed, and this has been the traditional model, is that a developer may obtain financing from a company called a publisher. And a publisher, think of a publisher as a film studio. They finance, market, distribute, and perhaps even get involved in the development of the product. And traditionally, publishers have always been the go-to guy to get financing for a game. And they would pay the developer a certain amount of money provided they delivered parts of the game on time and pursuant to a schedule. And the developer would collect royalties made on sales of that game. All the other money would go back to the publisher. That was the exchange. We'll advance you money, we'll distribute your product, but in return, we're going to keep a bunch of the revenue that you earn. That business model is slowly being changed. Why is it being changed? Well, digital distribution, mobile gaming, cheaper to distribute on those platforms. Therefore, I don't necessarily need financing from a publisher. And a third way that a developer works is that he makes a game, self-finances it, but doesn't have the capabilities to market the game. So what they do is that they enter into a deal with a publisher and pay a publisher a certain amount of money to distribute their product. Next, the platform companies. They provide the technological devices on which games are played, and these include consoles made up of the Microsoft Xbox One, Xbox 360, Nintendo's Wii U, so Sony PlayStation machines. Currently, console sales and PC sales, which includes digital distribution, make up around 80% of the revenue for the industry. And then there are, of course, other devices that are made, which include the handheld devices, which are focused primarily on games. That can be the Nintendo DS and the 3DS and Sony's PlayStation Vita. In addition, there is a mobile market, which includes feature phones and smartphones, such as the iPhone and various Samsung and Nokia devices, and I'll include them as part of the platform companies as well. Okay, you got it. And how do these companies make money? Well, what they do is they charge you a royalty for actually being on that platform. So PlayStation, Microsoft, they make most of their money not on sales of the console devices, but instead make sales on all the games that are sold, whether they make them or whether a third party makes them. So for example, and this is purely hypothetical, for every game that's manufactured and sold, Sony gets 15 cents, or they get 45 cents. That is different than PC, where PC, there is no owner of the castle, and therefore no royalty needs to be paid. And that's a big benefit for a lot of companies where they don't have a barrier to actually distribute their product. Games created for one hardware system can't play on another system unless the game is reconfigured or ported to meet the requirements of that hardware system. The platform manufacturers are basically the gatekeepers in deciding what games may appear on their system. Although, it's pretty rare today for console manufacturers to reject a game. The only reason they'll probably reject a game is because of technology reasons. It doesn't work on a particular system. And if you move to the next chart, you'll see a list of the goods and the bads regarding the different platforms, from console to personal computer to mobile. Many of these we discussed. Console run on a dedicated hardware, tend to be expensive to develop, wide variety of genre, which basically means there are a wide variety of games in which are created, such as role-playing games, shooter-up games, action games, sports games, controlled by the IP owners, and it's usually a box product. And digital now is making its way with console as well, but dominated right now by the box product, which means you buy the product at retail. Then the personal computer, wide variety of expense and genre, no single gatekeeper for the platform, majority of sales through digital distribution. And then finally, mobile, run on tablets and phones, least expensive to develop, although costs for mobile are going up, but in relation to the other platforms, they're not that expensive, but you're now seeing some mobile games hit the $1 million mark. And expect games to increase in cost as the technology gets better. It allows more things for the developer to do. More people need to work on the project. Engineers get paid a lot of money, so your costs are going to go up. Social and casual games, and largest number of potential players. And then finally, the third major player is the publisher, traditionally involved in the marketing, distribution, financing, and possibly even development of games. They play a major role in the industry primarily for two reasons. Because they tend to have more money, they'll bank more expensive games. Those are called AAA titles. They usually cost the most. Also, the most marketing dollars are spent in releasing those games. So that's a market that the consumer still wants because they want to play some of these elaborate games. The publisher is the one who's able to do that. And then on the chart, you'll see the major publishers throughout the world. If you continue scrolling down, many of the companies are US-based companies, and also Japan has a large presence. Electronic Arts, Activision, Ubisoft, which is a French company, Sega, Japanese company, Take-Two, an American company, Square Enix, NAMCO, Konami, and Capcom, all Japanese companies, but a presence throughout the world. Also, there's Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, and you see some pretty impressive numbers with those companies as well. And in addition, there are some publishers that are separate from the console world and specifically deal with... perfect. Although that may not be a bad thing, that's blocking my face. So the third thing is that a lot of publishers on the mobile side do not necessarily publish for other platforms. And EA is an exception, NAMCO BANDAI is an exception where they have a huge influence in the mobile space. So that's a look at some of the publishers and also what they're involved in. They also are important because they distribute product. And now I'm going to go to level 3, finally, digital distribution. Hopefully those 2 other levels will help you understand a little more about digital distribution. So digital distribution, from a video game person's standpoint, is another form of distribution in which content is delivered via the internet, via PC or a game console, without the use of physical media, and allows end users to instantly purchase games and also, just as importantly, acquire content and features for that game that come out after the game is released. And one of the gentlemen yesterday talked about he thought the life cycle for video games was only 6 months when you value the property. And in many ways that's true, because if a game doesn't sell well, it's only going to last for 6 months. But the nice thing about digital distribution, you can continue the lifespan of that game. And how do they do that? Well, they create new content. So once you've hooked the consumer in, you create new characters, perhaps you create new levels of gameplay. Maybe you create new costumes for a character, and aesthetically it looks better, and therefore the consumer wants to purchase that, and he does so. And therefore, it can continue the lifespan of a game. And that's very, very important. So within the last few years, you've seen improvements in technology. You've seen shrinking retail space for PC games, primarily in the United States and in Europe, and also the growth in bandwidth capabilities and rising internet use. So digital distribution has become the leading form of distribution for PC games and a growing form of distribution for consoles. A few years ago, consoles were not involved in digitally distributing content. Today, that's changed, and they're actively involved in that because they see the competition coming from the PC world. So why has this happened? Why has there been a change? And unlike the film industry, the barriers of entry for a game developer can be minimal, allowing almost anyone to create a game and digitally distribute it globally on consoles and PCs. Now, of course, it still has to be approved by the hardware manufacturer, but those barriers are pretty low. And it's even easier for mobile, because for mobile, all you need to do is you click on a click-through an agreement, even though you have to give your firstborn away, but you click it on, you pay a small fee, and assuming it's technologically okay, you're up. But wow, that's fantastic for game developers to have access to this world. That also creates a problem. Everyone now wants to distribute their games digitally. Everyone wants to be on the mobile space, and there's just a limited amount of space. So while you had the problem with retail, because if a game didn't sell in limited retail space, they pull your game off, so you have to sell very quickly and sell well. You're having that problem in the mobile space as well as the digital space, because there's so many games. How do 1,200 games released in a week get noticed? And unless it's a very well-known game, you're probably not going to get noticed. So the key for mobile games and for digital distribution is getting placement on that phone, on the distributor's website, so it can be seen, because most consumers are probably going to click the game that appears on their first screen or is marketed. But if you're on the 5th screen or the 10th screen, that's going to be difficult to be seen. So that's one of the major problems in the industry right now. Continuing with why digital has become a major option for developers. It's greater and direct access to end users throughout the world, provides a significant and potentially cheaper alternative than distributing in a retail. Because when you put a product in a store, it costs a lot of money. You have to manufacture the product. You have to advertise the product. And then when the product does poorly, guess what? The store says, take it back. We don't have space. So then you get returns, and then you have something called price protection, which we do not have time to talk about, but that's also another evil for publishers because they're losing money on a product. So you have a lot of cost, and you also have to maintain inventory. You also have to store the inventory. In addition to that, it's harder when you make a game for a console, because console manufacturers require a company, when they want to distribute a game on their system, to pay a royalty/licensing fee for every game manufactured. It does not matter whether that game is sold or not. You still have to pay a fee. So that can be a big investment, and so that causes problems for people when they're dealing with retail. That goes out the window when you don't have to deal with that particular issue. And finally, because I'm told this has to be my final comment, the other thing that makes it important for digital distribution is it provides a new source of revenue. So older games, such as catalog games, I work for the company that produces Pac-Man. It's been around for a long, long time. Well, I can digitally distribute an old Pac-Man game from the 1980s or 90s. Probably have to fix it up a little bit, but it's a well-known icon. All of a sudden, I can sell that game, because in retail, they wouldn't take that game. They want the top games. They're only going to take 10 to 20 games at retail. But digital now provides me the opportunity to go back into my catalog and to distribute. Also, a game's shelf life may not be 6 months. It can be a lot longer because of this so-called unlimited space in the digital world. So that's why digital distribution creates a tremendous opportunity for game developers and people of creative talent. If they don't have a lot of money or resources to develop a game, perhaps they can make a game that doesn't cost a lot of money and still get distribution, whether it be on retail or mobile device. And that's something that game developers are focusing in on. And that concludes my conversation about digital distribution.
Good morning. So, whilst we wait on my deck to load, can you hear me? No? Can you hear me now? Ah, that's right. Okay, so good morning. Whilst my deck loads, what I'd like to share with you today is the idea of IP plus business models plus technology equals opportunities for you in the digital space. So as a participant in the creative industry, how can you take these three elements and combine them to access your opportunity? An understanding of the key tech business models will open up for you all of the opportunities that are going to help you to monetize your IP. Some of the areas that we'll touch on as we talk today will be advertising, consulting and training as a means of monetizing your IP, and app sales. It is clear that digital developments can be used to boost IP value, but only if there's a foundation of respecting the value of IP and its relevance to the business models and how IP supports those business models. Let's dive in. Oh, 1 minute. Okay. So here we're seeing that there are various complex challenges, but these complex challenges are actually going to become a part of the new opportunities. Some of those challenges will include social inclusion, the digital workforce and how to create that digital workforce, and literacy. As a region, it is important that with our primary language being English, we are uniquely positioned to observe the US unfolding in its technological evolution. Of course, we also have a window to what's happening in Europe, in Asia, through our diaspora and the internet. And in short, these channels allows us to understand what's developing in the use of technology on a day-to-day basis. This vantage point of awareness, coupled with our limitations in access, creates a tension that leads to the innovation that we all thrive on in the region. For example, a team of students at a local primary school, and by local I mean Jamaica, recently came up with an idea on how to resolve the problem of parent-teacher communication around homework. They decided that voicemail would have been a better solution for them than email because their parents actually had some literacy challenges. Are you following? So when we talk about the social challenges of do we have a digitally ready workforce, do we have a digitally ready society, we do not have to feel that we are locked off from being able to exploit our IP and exploit ideas if we now just take what is possible, combine our knowledge of mobility, combine our knowledge of the social challenge, and use our awareness to create an opportunity. Based on yesterday's deliberations, and I'm sorry that not everyone was here yesterday, we now see that we're having a groundswell of IP being developed in Jamaica that will allow us to develop our potential. So let's look at how Microsoft did it. What did Microsoft do? From the very beginning, we felt that the mission needed to be to help people and businesses throughout the world to realize their full potential. And we did that by building on a solid foundation of IP. Now, we know you don't like the phone calls asking you how much Office you've been using, etc. But the reality is, to defend your IP, you first need a foundation of a solid legal presence in the space in terms of how to manage that IP. Am I going in the wrong direction? Yeah, hold on. Our approach to innovation is focused on committing to respecting IP as one of the key ways to help nations and industries evolve and grow. And yes, the creative industry is an industry. A concern that came up for me as we discussed yesterday was the separation that we're making between the creative industry and the standard manufacturing industry. Let us take Grace Ketchup. If you did not have someone that created that recipe, created that formulation, then there would be no need for having a brand and the brand IP of Grace. There would be no need for the development of the trade secrets around the formulations. So although we're talking about a creative industry, that creative industry translates eventually into a very powerful manufacturing industry. You can't separate the two in my mind in order for us to look at what is possible as we go to digitize our IP. So for Microsoft, we are proud to be associated and to be here today to discuss how we can look at the changing trends in technology and how those trends can actually help you to take your IP, whether it be a recipe, whether it be a book, whatever aspect your IP is taking, whatever form it takes, you can find a path for digitizing it if you understand the technologies that are impacting us today. There are 4 such technologies or 4 such trends in technologies that I'd like us to touch on: cloud computing, social, big data, and mobility. In cloud computing, we see that there's an enormous and a tremendous opportunity for the creative industry. It means that there's an increasingly level playing field where your book has as much an opportunity of being published as the book written by an author in New York City. The barriers have been eliminated and there's no need for excuses. Cloud solutions mean that you have access to the same technology that the traditional industries are using, the larger publishing houses, for example. And it means that the sole proprietor in a creative industry have the ability to deliver efficient, scalable, and secure real-time products and services based on a rental model where you're paying as you go, rather than a capital model where you are trying to do the massive investments that David mentioned to create your product and to make it digital. We'll look at an example soon. In short, when you look at what cloud is doing for us, you have the capacity to have an online store rather than a physical store. Social. Have you realized that every entity is now advertising a Twitter handle? In fact, for the conference, I'm sure we have a Twitter handle that we should be using, Jaipur Online, okay? So it's no longer about www. That's not the important thing anymore because we expect you to have a telephone in business, we expect you to have a fax machine, we expect you to have a website. So there's no need to talk about that anymore. The focus is going to be how do you interact and socialize through the use of Twitter. So if you're one of those persons that says, I don't do tweeting, I don't use Facebook, then you're not ready to come into the digital age, and you need to know, look into that and see how do you keep yourself modern. Now, okay, let me bring this home. Jamaica and the Caribbean was able to help Tessan to land a very physical career in singing, agreed? Through the voice. But the success of that was based on using the social engines of Twitter, Facebook, and of course picking up your telephone and calling someone in the States to say vote for her. But if we did not have those, and purchasing things by iTunes, purchasing music by iTunes, but if we did not utilize these capabilities, then we would not have been able to support a very real career based on IP, based on the creative industry. The other technology space that I want us to look at and to understand is big data. Each tweet that you give off, each Facebook post, each time you use your smartphone to track where you are or where your boyfriend is, each time you search, each time, or girlfriend too, each time you like an app or place a comment online, you are contributing to what we call big data. All it means that there's massive amount of data that's being generated, and if you had your own app out there, or if you have a Facebook page and that data is being generated around your IP, are you using it? Are you downloading the metrics and understanding the feedback from the number of persons who are telling you what they think about your IP? And then finally, we'll touch on mobility, which is where I think we have the greatest potential, and I think some of that was touched on earlier, because mobility is a very affordable space. It's a very affordable space. The move to mobile computing means that the devices in our hands, are dramatically reducing in cost. Right? So the numbers are going down in terms of cost. And so more and more persons are going to be able to reach the internet and reach you and reach your IP through access of these devices. The percentage of smartphone usage is still small globally, so don't think you've missed the boat. You haven't missed the boat, because everyone in the world will eventually have to have some smart device that they use for communication and for accessing content. And that's the important word, it's content, because the smartphones and the apps that we create for these smartphones, they require beautiful graphic design. They require content in order to have any value. No one is downloading an app just to download an app. You're looking for excellent content, whether it be access to a physical piece of IP that you want to purchase, a book, a designer wear, etc. You will still need to have persons who are creative behind these apps. Consider, for example, the mobile game developed by a Northern Caribbean University student, Nicholas Brown. He created a game, and I can show you during the break, called Jungle Escape, and generated over 250,000 in downloads. So that's a local student without dramatic access to pools of funds who was able to show that if he now focuses on developing games, he is likely to be able to create his own job on graduation from school. So the question here is, how can we help him? How can we help ourselves? How can we help all the potential persons out there that has some physical IP to convert that IP now that you understand the technology trends that will support you? To do that, I think we need to now turn our attention to looking at the business models that have made the technology sector so successful today. The six business models I have up here include licensing of IP, and this is where what Microsoft has done, where we have used 95% of our revenue is generated through licensing IP, selling advertising, selling retail products, selling consultancy, selling hardware, and selling cloud services. In simplest terms, a business model describes how a company makes money. There are a variety of business models in the technology sector, and they all have a role to play in terms of how you can roll out and utilize IP. However, it is important when looking at these business models and asking yourselves how you can apply them to your own business, that to understand that the role of IP has a different weighting depending on the model that you're looking at. Let's review. Let's ask a question. Dependent on where the company or your IP, depending on where you want to generate your revenue, what's the importance of IP? For example, I said before that we do licensing of IP. So therefore, our end customer would be people, persons in business, persons in schools who are purchasing our software. What that means is we will be putting people first. If you went with the advertising model, then your purpose is to sell adverts. So you don't need to put people first. You need to be thinking about the advertiser first, because people will become like an avenue through which you're generating data to understand the person better so that you can sell them an advert and generate revenue through an advertiser. So the IP is not as important in selling advertising as it is important if you are licensing your IP. Remember, your IP doesn't have to be software. It can be your book that you've written. Following me? If you are a low-cost retailer, is IP important? If you've decided to create a business to be a low-cost retailer online, then IP is not the most important thing unless you're really trying to sell IP. So if you're selling multiple books, selling multiple creative pieces of ceramics, etc., then IP becomes important. If you're selling music, then IP is important. But if your role is to be the person that's doing the sales, then what's really important to you is the logistics of delivering those items. It is not so much the IP of the items that matters to you, it's the cost of the items so that you can be a successful low-cost retailer. Selling consultancy. You've written a lovely book. You could actually sell consultancy based on this book online. Online, you can be offering your consulting services to help persons to understand how to implement the knowledge that you have captured in this book. So name a topic, you can now help someone just through saying, please download my book for free, and I will help you to utilize this knowledge, whether it be in career advice, a book on how to write your resume. You could turn around and be saying, I'm going to be your consultant in the process. Selling hardware is another way in which the technology space makes money, and for you, that will equate to selling your actual physical IP. And then finally, selling cloud services, we could translate that to, for example, we could translate that to, if you think of Tanya Stephens recently, her recent album was free of cost and available online, right? So her cloud service is effectively a concert, right? So for you, how could you take your book and make it become a service that someone now accesses online? One of the key ways would be to utilize apps, and so we want to touch a bit on that. If you were to have created an app related to your book, the persons could have downloaded an aspect of the book free of cost, and each time they want to learn more or to dig deeper into the book, they'll keep paying for access, similar to what we would do in the concept of a game, okay? So in summary, when we look at it and we look at the question of how do you take, I think we've now looked at the question of how you as a photographer, a graphic artist, a software developer, a poet, an author, a script writer, regardless of the realm of creative industry that you are pursuing, you will be able to find a way to take your content and create it in a digital space that is accessible online. Almost. In conclusion, our primary business model is based on protecting IP, and so we invest heavily in research and development, and then we defend that investment. And so you will also need to do that if you are looking at the model of licensing your IP. To succeed, we've decided to go with this model, which means we put people first. You will also need to do that if you are following this path. And putting people first, and I know that's a political term in Jamaica, but that's really the Microsoft message. In order to put people first, you will need to take that feedback when you are trying to, they're trying to get me off stage. You have to take that feedback when you are optimizing your IP in order to continue in sales. We believe that our region needs stronger IP protections. The fact that in the software industry we see over 80% of piracy, it shows us that as a region we have not fully embraced the idea of IP protection. And as we do that, we will start to see a greater focus on our own personal IP that we're generating in the creative sector. And in short, what we see is the benefits of defensible IP, digitized IP, and business models will lead us to unleashing our opportunity. Thank you.
No, I'm a bit taller than Marcel, just a bit. Let's raise it. Good afternoon. I'm very happy that Marcel raised the whole issue of Twitter earlier on, because I was wondering, well, first let me ask, how many Twitter users are in the room? Raise your hand. Okay, so let me ask you, what's the Twitter hashtag for today? What's the Twitter hashtag for the conference? That's the point. So it appears we don't have a Twitter hashtag. Right, so let's create one. Can we use create JIPO? Creative JIPO? JIPO creative? Let's take a vote. JIPO create. JIPO create. So that's the hashtag for today into tomorrow. JIPO create. All right? And I'm starting off with Twitter because I'm using a case study which touched on or will touch on some infringement issues which had to do with Twitter. And as you can tell, I love Twitter. I'm a big Twitter convert. So in January 2010, right, here we go. That's the intro. Moving on. In January 2010, many of you, and myself included, would have felt an earthquake in Jamaica, or you'd have felt the tremors. And of course, the major hit was taken in Haiti. And we all know about the Haitian earthquake. Daniel Morel was a photographer in Haiti when the earthquake actually occurred. And he posted several photographs of the devastation on Twitter. And I'm just gonna highlight a couple of them. Pixelated, but not less. He posted several of the photographs on Twitter, and an editor at AFP, which is a wire service, downloaded some of his photographs. Now, AFP had an agreement with Getty Images, which we all know about, which licenses stock photographs to businesses and media organizations. And AFP sent those photographs to Getty, which in turn licensed them to the Washington Post, CNN, and ABC. So Morel, of course, in 2011, sued AFP, Getty, and a number of these news organizations. And most of the defendants settled with Morel in 2011. But early last year, there was summary judgment on the matter in, I believe it was a court in New York, in which the court propounded some sort of decision on the matter of usage of material which is loaded on third-party platforms such as Twitter. The court found that though Mr. Morel had uploaded this photograph and it was of course retweeted, that usage was for a public benefit, a general public benefit. It was not for commercial distribution. And that decision was important in the social media world because we tend to think that once we post something on Instagram, Twitter, even Facebook, when you read their license terms, you think, well, I've given up really most of my rights to these photographs or whatever material it is, whatever creative material it is. But what this decision showed is that you still retain commercial rights, certainly, and of course the rights to attribution. You still retain commercial rights to the product and to your creative work. Mr. Morel was awarded eventually $1.2 million US. So Twitter, again, upload those photographs, don't worry. So I've chosen to begin with this case because for me it had several lessons. Firstly, generally the rules of ownership do not change in the digital world, or for the most part, they have not yet changed. There are some internet treaties which propose some changes, but they have not yet changed, especially for Jamaica. And of course, my presentation is largely based on Jamaican laws. Secondly, it appears that, again, the terms of use which we sign on to and sell our grandmothers in respect of, the terms of use which we click OK to, those don't erase our commercial rights to the product by large. And finally, fair dealing still exists. Right. Digital technologies represent new and exciting frontiers and rights holders. Not surprisingly, new digital platforms also facilitate piracy on an unprecedented scale. With infringing copies available via a viral rate through peer-to-peer file sharing systems, for instance. One of the issues facing copyright owners and creators is how to detect infringements and enforce rights in the face of these new technologies. And firstly, you'll ask, what is an infringement? And I'm operating on the background that we're dealing with creative works, and to a large extent, but not totally, to a large extent, creative works are protected by the law of copyright. So I'm going to be looking at copyright law. Largely, copyright in a work is infringed when a person without a license does something which the copyright holder himself or herself has the right to do, the primary right to do, i.e. you do something without that copyright owner's permission or license. In the digital world, it's a bit different because infringement sometimes, and to a large extent, occurs on different platforms and can occur on the platform which is owned by a third party. So YouTube, for instance, is a platform, and YouTube every day, people load videos upon videos to YouTube every day. YouTube may not be able to capture the infringing material as they go on, but certainly they can be considered, well, certainly under our laws, secondary infringers. In many jurisdictions, there are laws to protect the copyright owners in respect of these secondary infringers, as well as, of course, the primary infringers. In our Jamaican context, a secondary infringer is somewhat captured by our Copyright Act, and I'm going to read the section because I think it's important. Section 31(5) of our Act states that copyright is infringed by a person who, without the license of the copyright owner, transmits the work by means of a telecommunication system, otherwise than by broadcasting or inclusion in the cable service, knowing or having reason to believe that infringing copies of the work will be made by means of the reception of the transmission in Jamaica or elsewhere. In other words, if you have a platform and you, with knowledge, let that party load that infringing work on your platform, you could be said perhaps to be an infringer, a secondary infringer. But the important thing about this section, this provision, is that it requires actual knowledge. So you have to have knowledge that the person is an infringer. And without that knowledge, you perhaps will not be held liable under the Copyright Act. There are no specific legislative guidelines regarding the withdrawal of infringing works by ISPs, even for an interim period. And at best, copyright holders can write cease and desist letters to the ISP. However, again, if there is no proof of knowledge, there's not likely to be an infringement, or rather, there's not likely to be a remedy if you go to court. In other jurisdictions, in the US and in the UK, there is a focus on the immediate takedown of the infringing material, and at least time is given to the infringer, the alleged infringer, to provide some rationale or to provide some sort of information on the infringing product. So that's the ISP for you. Domain name disputes are actually quite relevant in, or that area is actually quite relevant in the sphere of the digital world and digital technology. Ordinarily, disputes are resolved by the dispute resolution method chosen by the parties under the registration agreement. And everybody knows what a domain is. I'm jumping ahead in the reason, but everybody understands that a domain is the URL where you go to and register your website. The parties normally, upon creating the domain, normally have an agreement, whether it's with GoDaddy or one of the other companies, under which they will choose some sort of dispute resolution mechanism. And there are several of those. I've chosen to set out here the ICANN policy, which provides guidelines on how and what will lead to the cancellation of a domain name if it is found to be infringing someone's trademark or someone else's domain. Generally, ICANN looks at whether the infringing domain name is identical or confusingly similar to a trademark or service mark owned by the complainant, whether the respondent has rights or legitimate interests to the domain name, and whether the domain name was registered in bad faith. And this is an important consideration because there are times in which you do have a domain name which is registered and which uses a trademark which is not your trademark, but it is not registered in bad faith. And the biggest example I've seen is a fan site that was created in respect of Stefani Germanotta. That's Lady Gaga. In which she sought to, that's fine, that's cool. In which she sought to take down a domain name, which I believe used Lady Gaga, but it was ladygaga.net or some other extension. And she felt that this was infringing her trademark. And ordinarily you would look at it and you say, well, yes, this is her trademark and this is ladygaga.net or .int. However, the arbitration panel found that really this was a fan site for Lady Gaga and that this was not a domain name being used in bad faith. Right? So you have to be careful about that. There are lots of companies around the world, and Coca-Cola is a big example of it, which will use infringing domain names or infringing fan sites on Facebook and turn them into their own fan sites. In fact, in the social media world, it's advised that you don't turn against your fans by asking them to take down your fan page. You say to them, okay, I'll help you. I'll give you my logo, and this is the correct version. And you help them along the way. Right. So that's the infringement side. That's that's how you protect your copyright, or you protect your IPR in your digital work. But we want to look at the commercialization of your intellectual property in this new digital economy. How do you protect yourself? And I think we spent a lot of time yesterday discussing the monetization of intellectual property, so I won't go into that in detail. Suffice to say, and also Marcel spoke about it quite well as well, that licensing is really the way to go, that everybody's looking to see how they can perhaps give sub-licenses, give exclusive licenses, non-exclusive licenses, and somehow extend the life of their IPR by having third parties use the product over and over again. And one big area in which we see licensing is open source software. And we need to compare open source software to proprietary software. And I wouldn't say in the old days, because it's not too old, but we used to have software developers who develop a software for your specific needs. And I say to you, I have all of these provisions in my contract which say you're limited in the manner in which you use this software. You can't modify it. If you accidentally modify it, it's mine. There are so many limitations that are put on you, and you acknowledge that I own all the IPR in this, and you will not change it in any manner, shape, or form. It's a material breach if you do, and your rights end immediately if you do. Now we're opening up to open source software, in which we're saying, this is the base software, here's the source code, go develop it. And of course, the biggest example is Android OS. Microsoft 2. Microsoft 2. Right? Microsoft 2. Right, Microsoft 2. Microsoft, right. They're the biggest contributors to open source software. You learn something every day. Thank you, Marcel. Thanks. Right. And now we have something that's developing called copyleft software, in which developers are saying, I will give you this source code, and I call it open source, but when you develop it any more than I have given it to you, any further modifications must be given to the public, right? And sometimes those are hidden clauses in software license agreements that you don't expect to see, because you think, okay, well, this is open source, so whatever I do is mine, so I'm collaborating on this work with the initial creator, but really, you're creating something for the benefit of the entire world, for the benefit of the public. And that's something which you have to be cognizant of if you are using open source software. In addition to that, we look at cloud computing. Now, cloud computing, and again, Marcel spoke very well about this on the tech side, has become quite pervasive. Everybody's using it to back up their data. Everybody has a Dropbox account. If you don't know why. So now we look at software as a service as opposed to as a good. And you don't need to have that in-house network space that you used to perhaps need. And creators now back up the data, their music, their customer and market statistics, designs on a cloud, which they do not own, but is always accessible. At least it should be. While most cloud services respect the intellectual property rights of the user/owner, there are inherent risks in using a cloud. And I'm using the megaload example because I believe it provides the perfect example of how risky, especially if you're in a particular industry, the banking industry, etc., how risky a cloud can sometimes be. Now, Megaload was a legitimate cloud provider which provided online storage and backup facilities. In 2012, the US Department of Justice shut down the company and seized its assets and brought criminal charges against the company for money laundering and copyright infringement, amongst other things. It so happened that in addition to the legitimate business it was doing, it apparently was doing some illegitimate business. But the servers used by Megaload were owned by third parties. And of course, when the criminal action was brought, the third parties said, well, I'm going to take up my servers. I'm renting it to you, and I don't want to be involved in this criminal action. And of course, Megaload could not pay its bills, which made it even worse. And the server owners decided to delete the information because they owned it. And when you think about it legally, unless Megaload had some sort of protection in its own contract with the server owners, more than likely the server owners were within its rights to do so. The problem was that Megaload did have legitimate paying customers who had used its online storage facilities to back up data. Eventually, a deal was worked out to allow these owners to access their information. But again, Megaload illustrates the risks which arise with these new digital opportunities. So in using cloud computing, creators should minimize these risks by 1, creating business continuity and disaster recovery plans. Creating, if possible, a local server backup of data or the works which you are trying to protect or trying to store. And if you consider your work or data to be high risk, consider paying the extra buck for private cloud computing services rather than public ones, which Megaload may have been considered. The anecdotal evidence is that there is a greater likelihood that you can negotiate with a private cloud computing company versus a public one as to IP rights. And I'm going to hurry the last part of my presentation. 5 more minutes. Now, a big part of the digital opportunity which lies ahead will be doing business online. And this is not necessarily intellectual property law, but it still is quite germane to developers and people who, especially app developers, who want to expand their business. The digital economy has created the online marketplace for goods and services, whether it's an app store or a goods place, such as Amazon. I'm not sure if we have any local examples of an Amazon or local small-scale Amazons, but certainly the future of doing business is online, and I've said that on several other presentations that I have done. The future of doing business is online. Jamaica does have an Electronic Transactions Act, which is relevant to the digital creators who sell their services. The Act recognizes electronic signatures and makes provision for protecting customers who transact business online. It prohibits the spamming of customers and the illicit use of personal information which has been submitted for a transaction. Very importantly, the Act requires the e-commerce provider to provide the customer with a security and privacy policy. It doesn't say what should go in it, but you have to provide a security and privacy policy in respect of the payment information, and the personal information provided. The E-Transactions Act does not stipulate what should be documented in the privacy policy, and I stated that already. But developers should be sensitive that the laws seemingly employ a self-regulation paradigm in respect of data privacy. So most of our apps require us to say, well, here's notice of what I'm going to take from you, your grandmother's middle name, and her great-great-great-grandmother's dog's middle name. And I also require your consent to that fact that I'm going to be taking this information from you. So we use a notice and consent method of obtaining private information. Finally, as we look to the future, we want to look at how the digital world can not only be an obstacle, because we're trying to really find the balance between using it as a creative force, but also not using it as a destructive force, i.e. not using it for the piracy that it is well known for. And in finding that balance, there are a couple creative methods which have been used worldwide, which I think we in Jamaica and the Caribbean can look on. First, the Creative Commons in the UK, and I'm thinking, well, why not have a Creative Commons in the Caribbean? And if you have not been onto the Creative Commons website, you need to check it out as you leave, or when you leave. The Creative Commons system allows persons to freely and openly license their material by saying, I give you unrestricted access to the material. And it allows perhaps startups to get their names out there. And I'm going to read to you a very short, it's called, on the website, it's called a human readable summary of the license, a very short version of a license which is found on the Creative Commons website. It says, you are free to share, copy, and redistribute the material in any medium or format. You're free to adapt, remix, transform, and build upon the material for any purpose, even commercially. The licensor cannot revoke these freedoms as long as you follow the license terms. And I implore you to visit. There are some case studies on the use of the Creative Commons, and you can visit www.teamopen.cc. You see they got a generic top-level domain name. And that's for another presentation. www.teamopen.cc to read about some UK success stories on the Creative Commons. In addition to which, we should increasingly look to crowdfunding. I know Jamaica National a couple months ago announced that they are starting this whole crowdfunding landscape, and certainly I am hoping that it will take off. I mean, there was earlier mention of Kickstarter, right, in the US, in which there's a similar way in which you get funds, especially for a tech startup, which is important. Finally, we need to be creative by using technology itself to prevent persons from using technology in a bad way. And I call this is my phrase, the Netflix experiment. We need to look at content not in the traditional manner of one episode this week, and then they have to wait another week for Scandal, which I do not watch, and another week for another show, another episode. What Netflix has done through the House of Cards, which returns on Friday, and Orange is the New Black, is put out the content on one go. So all 12, 13, 14 episodes, the more the merrier, are put out on one date. How does that prevent piracy? One, you don't have people creating these sites with illicit copies of the product because it's available on Netflix. In fact, you can get a free trial, you can subscribe thereafter. So I find that this is a good example of the market using technology to its benefit rather than using it, or rather than putting in place preventative measures because it is running scared. And perhaps that's what we need to do in the Caribbean as well. We need to find our own Creative Commons. We need to find our own creative ways of making technology work for us. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yes, it is afternoon. I have the enviable task of closing this session right before lunch. So if you're feeling anything like I am, I'm sure you're having fun right now. Can I take this off here? Great. Good afternoon. My name is Kenia Mattis, and I am here to talk to you about, by the way, who are the creatives in the house? Creative, please put your hand up. Great. I feel like I'm in such great company now because I was in a meeting last week and they were referring to me as you creative people over there. So I feel like now I'm in my and we're back. So I wanted to talk to you about just following up on the discussions that we've been having, and I think Grace really dovetailed into where I was going today, about living intellectual property. I'm finding that a lot more of what we're doing now is in terms of we're tweeting, we're going online, we're posting so much of we're sharing so many of our daily lives and experiences using Facebook, using social media. We're actually giving up information and images of ourselves, but we're actually sharing our intellectual property with the world. And we're doing this on a personal level, corporations are doing it, but we're also able to capitalize on opportunities as well, using some emerging trends in digital technology. So if you could go to, how does this work? Is that it? On the left? Oh, on the left, great. So I just wanted to touch base very, very briefly on some emerging digital developments that I've been paying attention to and I find really very interesting. We have already touched on the mobile revolution and just how our mobile or smartphones now are our life companions. I awoke to that I had that rude awakening when I got my Samsung, and I found that it was actually not untrue because I share so much with that phone. I do feel as if it is my life companion. But the interesting thing about it is that with the proliferation of smartphones and the fact that we're using them so much more now than we are using desktop computers in terms of how we're searching, how we're experiencing, how we're sharing information, and we're seeing here how it is or has been eclipsing the desktop origin of local search. What we're doing with smartphones now in terms of browsing the internet, going on social media, accessing music, experiencing games, all these things that we've been talking about. Notice that phone calls are number 5 on the list, by the way, because who really uses their smartphones for making phone calls anymore? What we're finding is that this has also helped to change how we experience content and how content is created. Because it's not so much that, well, at first, people could probably have argued that, well, because of battery life, for instance, or bandwidth issues, persons are creating these short videos and they're being circulated. I'm speaking about Vines, by the way. How many of us have ever seen a Vine, made a Vine, watched a Vine? Great. But also, so we have shorter videos, we have shorter content that is being circulated using our mobile phones. And these are actual videos that are well tailored to be a mobile phone, because that is actually the screen that we're spending the most time with anyway. But not only has it to do with shorter attention, with shorter bandwidth or shorter battery life, it also has to do with the shortening of our attention span as a society, as a culture. We really are very interested in getting to the point very, very quickly, which is what I'm going to do right now. Another thing is that, so we have these developments in terms of the proliferation of smartphones and just how much we share using these smart devices and how much time we spend with these smart devices, and the fact that content is now really tailored to be shared and to be spread using these devices. But what about digital developments that are now not only impacting the digital world, but also the physical world, the material world? And by this I'm referring to what they call the Internet of Things, which is a concept that I find is very, very interesting in terms of right now, we spend most of our time with our smartphones because they are smart. But in the coming years, everything around us will be smart as well. It's not just your phone. I'm talking about wearable technology, for instance. The fact that you can actually see your tweets on your clothes as it will light up, in terms of your clothes actually reflecting your status. In fact, there is a dress that is called Intimacy, which changes the level of opacity based on your mood or based on your heart rate. So that's for evening wear, of course. So it's very interesting that now objects or the things around us are interacting with our moods, with our status, with everything that's happening. What I was saying just now is that, of course, you wear the clothes, you step out, but when you get excited, it gets more and more transparent. And that's a real thing that is in prototype right now. In terms of wearable technology, we're talking about, of course, the Apple iWatch or the Samsung smartwatch or the Google Glass as well. And all of these things are giving us instant information, so we're always on the go. There's also, you can actually step out wearing all of these smart devices, wearing your smart shirt, wearing your smart evening dress, and also a printed 3D pair of shoes. Because there is very little time, there is very little distance between an idea and an actual product once you can press print on a 3D printer. So all of these things are really impacting on distribution costs, because now you don't have to wait on Amazon anymore when you see a pair of shoes, or even go out there to Halfway Tree. You can go online, probably find the code, and then you can download the pair of shoes, print it at home, and you step out. So these are developments which are taking place as we speak and are really changing the way in which we interact with things and interact with our environment. Ladies, don't get carried away now. I'm excited. I can only imagine how excited you must be. But these developments also have, I believe, an impact on how we as creators should think about the objects that we are creating. This impacts, for instance, how we'll be able to access our target markets and the types of environments we really should be creating for. So, all of this, I believe, really changes how we live our intellectual property and how our environment is really going to reflect that. I don't have to go into smart cars and smart homes. And the fact that it's not only individuals who are going to experience these developments, but also governments. We have the case of smart trash bins or smart waste bins, which I think it's in Cleveland, in Charlotte, and also in Dubai, where you have governments who are placing chips in garbage disposal bins. They're using RFID technology. And what they're actually doing is that the chips can now communicate when the trash bin was last emptied. How much recyclable material are you putting in there? If a garbage truck is passing by, it can send out an alarm so that it doesn't pass before it is collected. And using this information, governments can now be more selective and more targeted in how you're deploying your waste collection teams. You can now better track who is recycling and who isn't. So now if you only find that if somebody is coming to you but skipping your neighbor because you're the one who is not putting enough recyclable material in a garbage bin, your chip is actually giving information on you, right? So using this type of information, we're finding that really everything has to be rethought. We now have a case where we have everything that is information around us needs to be rethought because everything is a source for new creativity. We have a phrase that says the content is king. I believe that the content creator is king. The person who can actually see mundane information, who can see an everyday activity and make something new and fresh out of it. One example is Virgin America. Who has seen their in-flight video? Okay. I'm going to just play a very brief clip on it. This is something that normally we'd shut your eyes and move away from, but this is what they've now done. Yeah. There's a really cool song that's actually playing. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Look up the rest of it on your own time. This is something. This is something that I would really actually want to watch and participate in when I'm on a flight. So they've converted something that's completely boring, something that's completely like waste territory, and now it's a video that has over 8 million views on YouTube. Here's another development that I personally am involved in. ListenMi News. Who has ever seen or heard of ListenMi News before? Okay, we have, yay, great. So we decided as ListenMi Caribbean to look at the news, which is something that unfortunately more of us don't watch because A, we don't have time, or B, it's a bit depressing at times. You don't have to turn the TV and I wonder who did today. But how can we actually turn the news into something that's interesting, entertaining, and informative?
ListenMi News. AC icon. Hey Kenia. Jump. Listen news. Everywhere that I bring one through traffic in the sky. I don't really news. Breaking news. In the cartel case. Them a send text and now watch your face. Incriminating BB messages and voice note put on display. Yeah, remember me name. Bird Box. Yeah, I knew when we can leave the island. Yes, I went upstairs and
So that's just a snippet of what it is that we're doing. Hopefully you're able to follow. If not, they're closed captioning on the videos. YouTube.com/user/ListenMi to see other episodes. But essentially what we're trying to do is we're looking as content creators at mundane content or content that you can actually remix. Everything around us now has the opportunity to be remixed, to be experienced in a brand new way. And the information about the wearable technology and what is happening with the material space is still relevant because we can actually remix how we experience locations and spaces. Imagine if we were to visit the Bob Marley statue, for instance, and you could actually hear what other people have thought or what songs other people could actually think of or feel when they're at that location. And then you could play that soundtrack, add yours as well, and enhance the experience of what is happening at that location. And we could do this with other tourism spots as well here. So it has to do with how you experience the environment and the world around you.